Hello, my dear children. Let's learn the continuation of the story The Grain as Big as a Handshake. The next portion is The Great Grandfather. The king sent for the old man's father, and he was brought before him. He came walking on one crutch. The king showed him the grain, and the old peasant, who was still able to see, took a good look at it. After that, the king sent for old man's father, because that old man said that suppose my father have a great knowledge about the grain. So the old man approached or reached in the court, and he was brought before him. And the old man's father brought before the king. He came walking on one crutch. Crutch means walking stick. So he came walking on one crutch. The king showed him the grain, and the old peasant, who was still able to see, took a good look at it, because he can able to see that corn or that grain. And the king asked about the grain to the old man's father. Can you tell us, old man, where a corn like this used to grow? Have you ever brought anything like it or sown it in your fields? Though the old man was rather hard of hearing, he could hear better than his son. But the old man have a lack or hard of hearing, but he can hear better than his son, because his son, that the old peasant, was not able to hear and see, but this old man's father, he can able to see and hear better than his son. No, he said, I never sowed nor reaped any grain like this in my field. As for buying, I never brought any for in my time. Money was not yet in use. Everyone grew his own corn, and when there was any need, we shared with one another. I do not know where such kind of corn grew. The old peasant's father replied that I never sowed nor reaped any grain like this. I never buy corn for money, because everyone grew his own corn, and there was any need we shared with one another. I do not know where such kind of corn grew. Ours was larger and yielded more flour than the present day grain, but I never saw any like this. The peasant replied that our grain was larger than this, and it yielded more flour than the present day grain, because it is more productive. But I never saw any like this grow. I have, however, heard my father say that in his time the grain grew larger and yielded more flour. You had better ask him. The old peasant father replied to the king, my father have a great knowledge about the corn. Suppose you have to ask him better. So the king sent for the old man's father. They found him and brought him before the king. He endured walking easily and without crutches. The old peasant's father was very energetic. He endured walking easily without any walking stick or crutches. His eyes were clear, his hearing good, and he spoke distinctly. The king showed him the grain, and the old grandfather looked at it. From this para, we can understand that the old man's father was very energetic, because he can hear good, he spoke distinctly, and his eyes were very clear. The king showed the grain to the old peasant's father, and he turned it about in his hand. It is long since I saw such a fine grain, said he, and he bit a piece of tasted it. The old peasant's father or old grandfather said that long ago he was saw such a grain, and he bit a piece of and tasted it. It is very same kind, he added. Old grandfather said that he saw such a grain from long ago, and he take a piece of it and tasted it. And he said that it's a very same kind. The next portion is the ending portion, that is the corn. Tell me, grandfather, began the king, when and where was such corn grown? Have you ever brought any like it or sown it in your fields? The king asked the same question to the old grandfather. Tell me, grandfather, when and where such corn grown? Have you ever brought any like it or sown it in your fields? And the old man replied, corn like this used to grow everywhere in my time. I lived on corn like this in the days of my youth and fed others on it. It was such a grain that we used to sow, reap, and thresh. The grandfather added that from the youth or from the days of my youth, this kind of grain that we used to sow, reap, and thresh. And the king asked, tell me, grandfather, did you buy it anywhere? Or did you grow it all yourself? The old man smiled and said, in my time, he answered, no one ever thought of such a sign as buying or selling bread, and we knew nothing of money. Each man had enough corn of his own. In the previous days or during the young days, any peasant or any farmer will never buy or sell bread because we have enough corn of our own. So we never want to buy or sell corn like this. Tell me, grandfather, asked the king, where was your yield and where did you grow corn like this? The king again asked the question, where was your field and where did you grow corn like this? And the grandfather answered, my field was God's earth. Wherever I plowed, it was my field. Land was free. It was a thing no man called his own. Labor was the only thing men called their own. The grandfather said that the land was free, so we cannot say that it's our own land. Labor is our own because labor is the men's power. Answer me two more questions, said the king. The first is, why did the earth bear such grain then and has ceased to do so now? And the second is, why does your grandson walk with two crutches, your son with one, and you yourself with none? Your eyes are bright, your teeth sound, and your speech clear and pleasant to the ear. How have these things come about? The king again asked a question. The first is, why did the earth bear such grain then and has ceased to do so now? The second question is very important question. Why does your grandson walk with two crutches, your son with one crutch, and you yourself with none? Your eyes are very bright, your teeth sound, and your speech clear and pleasant to the ear. How can this possible? And the old man answered, these things are so because men have ceased to live by their own labor and have taken to depending on the labor of others. In olden times, men lived according to God's law. They had what was their own and coveted not what others had produced.